Why is the £1.5 billion takeover of Manchester United failing? When Sir Jim Ratcliffe became co-owner of the club, it was supposed to signify a new dawn at United. Yet 18 months after his huge takeover, it's been the complete opposite. United in that time have fallen fast, becoming by far the worst United side in over 50 years. And it's because of the terrible mistakes Ratcliffe has made while in charge that cost United. Mistakes he can't really afford to make, as unless he finds a way to dig the club out of this hole fast, the club will be in even more trouble than you think. The reason for their limited time traces back to the Glazers, who have sunk the club and cost them billions. So how did it get this bad? Well, the answer goes much deeper than you think. It's a string of decisions that have slowly killed United, where now we're starting to see how bad everything really is. There's only one way out of this mess, but it needs to happen fast, otherwise the future of Manchester United is looking very dark. At the end of 2023, Sir Jim Ratcliffe spent £1.5 billion to acquire 27% of Manchester United and gain sporting control of the club. It meant the very unpopular Glazers were no longer the decision makers, although they were still majority owners. This was supposed to signify a changing of the club culture, a man born in Greater Manchester now overseeing the club. However, he had a lot of work to do and he had to do it fast. United that season were falling quickly. They got knocked out of the Champions League group stage and the league results were starting to get ugly. They finished the season with just 2 wins in 9 games. Eric had failed to qualify for the Champions League, finishing 8th, and the football wasn't good. It was at this moment that Ratcliffe knew Eric wasn't the man to lead Man United to glory. His first major decision as co-owner was replacing the manager with someone who could lead the team long term. They were in the process of interviewing a few candidates and even had a front runner in consideration. Somehow though, they managed to make the FA Cup final after almost blowing a 3-0 lead to Championship side Coventry, meaning Eric's final game in charge was going to be the FA Cup final against their noisy neighbours. Everyone expected them to lose this game, except they managed to pull off an impossible task, bagging Tenhag his 2nd trophy in 2 years. It meant Man United qualified for Europa League, and it showed Ratcliffe the true potential of the team, showing that on any given day they could beat the best in the world. Yet, rather than this being a moment of celebration by Ratcliffe and the board, it brought up the uncomfortable question, should they still sack Tenhag? United evaluated their options. They were extremely close to hiring Tuchel, but he backed out. De Zerbi didn't seem like the right fit, and Pochettino fell out of consideration. The more they weighed up their options, the more they leaned to Tenhag. But this was a big choice to make. Ratcliffe's first major decision had to go right. Whoever he picked was going to be the manager for the next 5 years, and getting that choice wrong would cost them dearly. So would Tenhag really be the right choice? Outside of domestic cups, his performances in Europe were bad and his league position was the worst for United in over 25 years. Plus, recruitment under him was shockingly bad. This decision wouldn't have even been a choice if it wasn't for a Coventry player being offside by millimeters. It's not much of a strategy to keep a manager because he won 1 game, is it? That's not to say he didn't do some good for the team, but ultimately moving on, which was their initial decision, might have made more sense. Instead, the team extended Tenhag's contract and said, Eric has our full backing. We're going to continue working very closely with him to help him get the best results out of the team. Do we still believe in Eric? Absolutely. The choice was made. Alongside the manager, Ratcliffe's next big decision was the sporting director, someone who could oversee the entire project for the next decade, someone to fulfill the vision of the club, implementing a clear strategy for recruitment, play style, academy, commercial success, and more. Sir Jim Ratcliffe had one name in mind: Dan Ashworth, the Newcastle sporting director who played a pivotal role in the success of the club. Ratcliffe described him as 10 out of 10. Eventually they hired Dan, and in the summer of 2024, he got to work. The 2 most important positions in terms of sporting were now made. These 2 were now in charge of the turnaround of the club's future. The first order of business was signing players, something Man United have gotten so wrong in the past before, but with the new director and the club fully back in Tenhag, they gave them a big budget to play with. They spent nearly £200 million that summer on 5 new signings. With the signings made, the people in place, United were ready to start a new regime under Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and their aim was very clear. United CEO Omar Barada said the club were aiming to win the Premier League title by 2028. The people leading that vision for the next 4 years was these 2. Yet, just 2 months after Barada's statement, both of them were sacked in a move that cost United hundreds of millions, and now they had to start again from square one. So what the hell happened? Well, the performances from the team got worse to start the season with no real signs of improvement or identity. Tactically, it really didn't work. They tried to press high from the front but struggled, and even when they did win the ball high, they struggled to convert any chances. Committing so many players forward to press also meant they were often left with a sole midfielder to cover a bunch of ground, which wouldn't be so terrible if that sole midfielder wasn't a 33-year-old who lost his legs, struggling to keep up with counter-attacks and quick transitions. They also played a super high line, which only works if your backline is organised and fast, and their backline was neither of those things, and so it often left them really exposed to chances. This team under Tenhag were conceding shots at a stupidly high rate. In the 23-24 season, they conceded the second most shots in the league behind dead last Sheffield United. And since Tenhag took over in 2022, they conceded 4 or more goals in a single match 7 times, and 3 or more goals 24 times, which was the most of any Premier League club during the Tenhag era. None of these things improved in the 3 months to start the 24-25 season. The tactics were still poor, and they still conceded a bunch of goals with attackers who just failed to take any chances. They were 14th at the time Eric was sacked. But maybe the biggest reason of all was the recruitment under Eric was terrible. £600 million spent on millions on wages, and out of all of the signings that were made, you tell me who was worth the money. Now seriously, pause the video and count how many of them warranted their price tag. I'd be shocked if you had to use more than one hand to count them. Whether the decision to sack Tenhag was right or not doesn't take away from the fact that they went about it in the wrong way. If they were going to sack him, then do it in summer. If not, you can't then sack him in October. The guy had just spent 200 million on players. It also meant whoever was brought in to replace him was starting at a serious disadvantage. That man ended up being Rúben Amorim, who was set up for failure. He had to take over a team mid-season that were honestly terrible, with players that he didn't want nor fit his system, a system that he had no time to implement properly. He was thrown into the deep end and now was under a ton of scrutiny. Yet the biggest issue with hiring Rúben Amorim was the fact that his hiring was linked to the firing of Dan Ashworth. Ashworth and Man United's chiefs ended up clashing on some of the sporting decisions. The big clash came when Tenhag was fired. Ashworth was supposed to find a replacement, but the way he went about it didn't really please Ratcliffe. Ashworth wanted someone with Premier League experience. He wanted to hire a data company to evaluate candidates and wanted to interview a list of names before picking his guy. A meticulous process, which is how he's operated his entire career. Jim Ratcliffe didn't like this method. He wanted one name, no process or interviews or data company. Eventually, it was CEO Omar Barada who picked Amorim, and he, Ratcliffe and Brailsford went to fly to Lisbon to meet Amorim to convince him to join. Ashworth had no say in this matter, despite it being his job. This disagreement led to Ashworth being let go in December. It seems like Ratcliffe didn't really know much about the guy he was hiring or his process. He was too involved in the matter and didn't let Ashworth do things his way. For Ratcliffe to backtrack on 2 major decisions so quickly was a red flag.
You know, the Eric Ten Hag, the Dan Ashworth decisions were errors. There were some mitigating circumstances, but ultimately they were errors. I accept that and I apologise for that. And all I would say is chemistry, really.
However, the real issue with these moves highlighted a much deeper issue with Manchester United. It cost them £5 billion to bring in Ashworth from Newcastle. It then cost them £4.1 million in compensation to let him go. It cost £10 million to sack Tenhag and £11 million to bring in Amorim. That's over £30 million spent in mere months due to poor decisions made by the owner. Not to mention the $200 million they spent on the recommendations of 2 guys who were no longer at the club. Literally hundreds of millions this move cost them. But the people paying the price for this weren't the execs, it was the staff and the fans. In summer 2024, the club announced they were cutting costs across the board. United had the most staff of any other Premier League team until they had a plan to initially cut 250 jobs. But there's more. The United staff that survived the job cuts had a range of benefits taken away from them. They were made to pay £20 to travel on coach to the FA Cup final, they had their Christmas parties cancelled, and company credit cards were slashed. Fans too suffered. Disabled fans had their allowances and club dinners taken away from them, as well as ticket prices for everyone now being increased to £66. Now, this is generally how Jim Ratcliffe has operated his businesses. He takes over a company, cuts costs, and operates them more efficiently, eventually turning a profit and thriving. The issue here is, football doesn't really operate the same way. Plus, he's cutting costs by taking away Christmas parties, which would help staff morale, and making fans foot the bill, which led to outcry and turning the fans against him. Yet they're spending millions on wages and forking out millions to sack guys you paid millions to get. In the midst of all of this, one major issue still prevailed. Under Rúben Amorim, the team got worse. Amorim played a 3-4-2-1 system, but with United, he didn't have the right personnel. His two-man midfield needed to cover a lot of ground and be quite mobile, but the midfielders at his disposal didn't really fit that, and so constantly they'd get played around and struggle to keep up with much more physical midfields, making the middle of the park wide open. Mix that with a ton of individual errors, and United just kept conceding goals that very often looked extremely preventable. But it wasn't just defensively a problem. Attacking wise, they just didn't really have an identity outside of give the ball to Bruno and hope for the best. Their build-up play was extremely poor, giving away the ball in dangerous areas far too often. Plus, this was a system that relied on having flying wing-backs with creative number 10s. Needed to be good ball carriers, except the players at Rúben Amorim's disposal weren't that, meaning creatively going forward it was pretty tough to watch. If they had, I don't know, hired Amorim in the summer and spent 200 million on players that might have fit his system, this might not have been such a drastic problem. His brutal honesty about the situation highlighted just how bad he truly thought they were.
And we have to accept that it's unacceptable to lose so many games for any club in Premier League. Imagine Manchester United. The opponents are better than us in many details. We are being the worst team in history of Manchester United. I don't like to arrive here and make excuses. Sometimes I talk about relegation. I think our club needs a shock.
I'm saying all the time, I will not have the time. We have to get it right fast.
Our position is the reflection of our performance this season, and we have to accept. We say to the fans the truth, that we lack a lot of things in our team, and we have a lot to do and to focus on improving the team.
His transparency about the club is what fans like about him. He didn't make excuses like Tenhag did and accepted the reality that they just weren't winning enough games. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this team was historically bad. In his 26 league games as manager, he won just 7 games, 3 of which were against the relegated sides. They finished 15th on goal difference, which is their worst league finish since 1974 when they were relegated from the English First Division. There were next to no positives to take away from the season except from their shot at one trophy, the Europa League. For a while it looked like they were going to pull it off. They made an extremely late comeback against Leon, sealing a spot in the semis, where they played Athletic Bilbao, and they actually looked like a strong side, dismantling the Spanish team 7-1 over both legs. Their final hurdle was Tottenham, a team that were actually having a worse season than they were. It was a perfect opportunity to go into the 25-26 season with their heads held high. And well, United lost their biggest game in decades. This loss was more than just losing a trophy. United had to win the Europa League for a range of different reasons. Losing actually cost them hundreds of millions. Had they won the final, they would have received £40 million through qualifying for the Champions League, £17 million in prize money, and £21 million in matchday revenue with European football. That's just the minimum as well. Reaching the knockouts would have boosted those numbers even more. It also meant they took a hit commercially too. They'd failed to attract more sponsors, and sponsors can charge less due to no European football. Performance-based sponsors also give extra money for qualifying for the Champions League, like Adidas, which from the upcoming season will deduct £10 million for every season they don't get Champions League football. Missing out on this money is extremely damaging because United desperately needed this extra money, which now causes a huge issue for the future of the club. The problem stems from United's business model, which since 2005 has done nothing but suck the club dry. The Glazers bought the club for £790 million, but borrowed and loaded £550 million of that debt onto the club, which is why United fans have been Glazers out for 20 years. Since 2005, United have paid £835 million in debt interest repayment. They've paid £166 million in dividends to shareholders, £129 million of which has been pocketed by the Glazers. And they've also paid roughly £200 million in external debt payments as well, meaning in the last 20 years, United have paid at least £1.2 billion because of their leveraged buyout. That money is going towards nothing. Plus, the initial £550 million debt is now £730 million. Man United are still paying around £35 million a year in interest. Meanwhile, the family has pocketed £1.3 billion over the years and they still own 70% of the club. The second major financial issue is that on top of that mountain of debt, the club is still losing money in a variety of ways. Their recruitment over the last 12 years has cost them a significant amount of money. Their net spend since 2013 is negative £1.35 billion, which is an insanely high amount compared to other clubs in Europe. And this is on players who haven't even been remotely worth it. Those massive transfer fees are still costing them to this day. They still owe $300 million in transfer fees to other clubs, some of which is for players who won't even play for them anymore.
If you look at the players that we're buying this summer that we didn't buy, we're buying Anthony, we're buying Casemiro, we're buying Onana, we're buying Højlund, we're buying Sancho. We've inherited those things, so we have to sort that out. So, you know, for Sancho, who now obviously plays for Chelsea and we pay half his wages, we're paying £17 million to buy him this summer. You know?
The recruitment being so poor hasn't just cost them money either, but also their performances on the pitch. The team has missed out on Champions League football 6 of the last 13 years, which means their revenue has also taken a hit. All of those financial losses mixed with one thing sunk the club's finances: the pandemic. United pre-pandemic was still spending recklessly, but could afford to, as the club's pre-tax profit was still holding up well. Except once the pandemic hit, all of United's poor finances finally caught up to them, and since then they've posted losses in the hundreds of millions and have failed to recover since. This is where Ratcliffe comes in. In his attempt to raise funds, he's taken a few unpopular methods to try and do so. Firstly, raising all ticket prices again 5% for the upcoming season, a move that will raise a couple million a year, but one obviously met with backlash. Secondly, by offloading players fast. There have been talks of United selling 2 of their bright young stars in Kobbie Mainoo and Garnacho in order to balance the books, as selling them would represent as pure profit. Then there's of course the players whose future at Man United has already been decided, and now it's just about finding a buyer. However, the main way to raise funds has been the most controversial. Ratcliffe already announced in 2024 that 250 jobs were getting cut, but in 2025 he announced a further 200 redundancies. 450 jobs slashed in just 12 months. And from a finance point of view, those redundancies can save upwards of £17 million per year in the long run, which does give Man United some much needed financial breathing room. Except there are some drawbacks to that. It isn't just lunch ladies and receptionists leaving, but senior executives have left too. Big names in Manchester United's commercial department have gone as well. Names you're unfamiliar with, but this was the team that orchestrated United's massive sponsorship deals with Adidas and Snapdragon, and now they're going. United's scouting department has been slashed, as well as a number of directors being let go too. It's important to note that the decisions made by Ratcliffe come as a direct consequence of how the club has been run since Fergie left. He was left with little choice in some of the moves, and he did inherit a pretty tough position. But for fans and everyday working people to be the ones to actually pay for this is a joke, and it's just plain wrong. We also have to acknowledge the fact that Ratcliffe has already made some costly mistakes in his first full year as co-owner, and there's little to suggest that might change. In order for United to truly save themselves financially, they need to do 2 things. 1, recruit better. Ratcliffe already pissed $200 million letting Tenhag go shopping, then firing him months later. This is a club spending like a Champions League side, yet they don't have Champions League football. Second thing they need to do is win. The longer United stay out of Europe, the more it's going to cost them revenue-wise. Meaning if United don't start performing well as soon as possible, it's going to be even harder to dig themselves out of the hole the Glazers put them in. So what does this all mean for the future of Manchester United? Well, in the short term, the 2025 transfer window is make or break. United's biggest expense is recruitment, and they really cannot afford to get it wrong this time. Yet at the same time, 1 or 2 signings isn't going to cut it. United need a massive squad overhaul if they're serious about competing. That means selling a bunch of unwanted players and bringing in instant difference makers. Ruben is also under pressure. Him joining mid-season hurt his stock. Had he joined this summer, he would have had much more time to adapt and get things wrong before the patience wore thin. Except he's now 7 months in the job with just 7 Premier League wins. Rúben Amorim's situation this year is better than when he first joined, now that he gets more transfer money, more time to prepare, and even the fact he only has to play 1 game a week from now. But if United decide Ruben isn't the right guy, they would have committed to a manager who plays a very rare system, and it would set them back even further. Personally, I think Ruben is a more than capable coach, and that given genuine time to mold the team to fit his proven system, this team could get back to winning ways. But time isn't something Ruben has. There is a project to look forward to for the long-term future of Manchester United. The announcement of a brand new state-of-the-art stadium with a 100,000 seater capacity. The stadium will cost around £2 billion, and although United are strapped for cash, raising funds for the stadium is more than possible. They can sell the naming rights of the stadium. The club also owns the massive plot of land around the area, which is worth hundreds of millions. The rest of the cost will be loaned and paid out over time using the revenue the stadium itself will generate. However, the biggest question of their future remains, and it's what happens to their mounting debt. The Glazers won't pay it off, and Jim Ratcliffe isn't going to pay it off for no gain. It seems unlikely the Glazers give Ratcliffe more shares in the club if he pays off the debt, as it doesn't go into their pocket. Meaning, if Jim wants to be the majority owner, he's going to have to pay the Glazers more billions and then take on that debt as well. However, if he keeps his 25% stake and he turns the club's fortunes around, gets them winning again with a great new stadium, generates a ton of revenue and uses that to pay off the debt, well, then the Glazers still get their debt cleared. Either way, they will continue to profit off this club, a club they have destroyed financially, and they are waiting for someone else to bail them out. The whole mess started with them. The way they bought the club shouldn't have been allowed in the first place, and now the people who are paying for this are the fans and everyday working people. Sir Jim Ratcliffe now has the impossible task of solving the club's debt while simultaneously making the club perform well again, something that so far he is struggling to do. It's why his takeover is failing. He's trying to solve two major issues at once, issues that a corrupt family caused.